Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I appreciate it. I also love it if you leave comments, so if you leave ideas for videos or constructive criticism or how you do things or advice, whatever, those are always nice to hear, so I'd love to have that. Today I'm going to do something a little different. Thursdays I typically either do some sort of instructional kind of advice thing or I do a multi-project video, and so today's I'm going to do some advice for beginners, and the things in particular I want to talk about are some things to avoid as a beginner, and I've picked out 5 of what I think are kind of the most relevant ones. At least they were for me, and I hope you find those useful and informative. So before we get started, I wanted to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patreon are my #1 supporters, and I think they're awesome. I have a new one named Harper. I wanted to thank Harper for signing up, and I think that you will find, Harper, that that group over there is a super nice community with a lot of knowledge and some really friendly people. So enjoy getting to know them and finding out all of the cool things that they can make and show you how to make. So thanks also to my pre-existing patrons who have been so supportive throughout the past few years. Thank you for that. The other group is my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 13,800, I believe, and that's amazing, and I really appreciate all of your support. Not only the financial support, like the buy me a coffees and the super thanks, those are really handy as well, but the super nice comments I get, and the very complimentary comments. So thank you for that. It's really moving and touching, and it helps me to know that people are getting something useful out of these, so thanks for that. With those things being said, let's get started on the video. This is one of my design idea books, and recently I started putting some important and useful charts on the back. I have a lot of overseas people who follow my channel, and a lot of them use the metric system, and so I'm trying to break the habit of using fractions of an inch, because I think that's not a very, it's kind of cumbersome for jewelry making. But this has fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeter conversions, so I find this pretty useful. There's one other one on there that has American wire gauge to the metric system as well, and I think that's useful. That's useful too, because not everybody uses American wire gauge. The reason I find these useful is when I'm drawing up projects, it helps me to kind of clarify my ideas in my head. Now today's is not really a project video, it's more of an informative one, but I wanted to talk about some important things. So I've listed 5 of the things that jumped into my mind that I struggled with as a beginner, and hopefully I can help you to avoid some of those pitfalls as well. When you first hit the point where you start thinking, I wonder if I could learn how to do that kind of stuff, oftentimes you're looking forward into the future and seeing the things you'd like to be able to make without having yet learned the skills to do it. And it's easy to fall into the trap of trying to make some things that really are out of your skill level before you learn the basic skills that will allow you to eventually do those things. And so I'm not trying to rein in your enthusiasm for the what you're wanting to learn. However, I am trying to prevent you from trying to do something that you are not going to be able to do until you've had more practice and more experience. I'm trying to prevent you from experiencing the frustration of melting things or ruining things over and over again because you just have not yet quite learned all of the little tricks and skills to using a torch. So, for example, I would say, I'll show you a couple of pieces. Like, this is one I made a while back to set a shell, and so it doesn't seem that complicated, but there's a number of things until you've learned how to solder pretty well that might be really challenging. So first and foremost, there's a hinge on here, and making your own hinge and soldering a pin in there is something that takes a little bit of practice, and so that would be something I wouldn't recommend for a beginner. Shells are delicate, and so one of the things I was trying to do here was to create sort of some sort of a setting that would protect the shell, but also allow me to set it in there without breaking the shell. And so I had to do something with some little prongs like that, and prongs are kind of challenging for a beginner, as well as getting wire shaped to exactly the proportions you need it to be. Some of this delicate soldering, like these little I was trying to mirror the shape of the shell a little bit. These lines made out of little skinny 20 gauge wire, I believe. Soldering those in place and getting them all positioned and everything when you're a beginner at soldering is going to be nearly impossible until you've figured out some of the tricks and the ways that solder behaves under the temperatures you're using. So theoretically, it's not impossible for you to make something like this as a beginner. It's going to be really challenging, and the result you get out of the end might not be as nice as you'd like. One of the reasons I say I made this one the first one was years ago I was teaching a class, and I made the mistake of allowing someone who was a brand new silversmith to talk me into letting them do something that was much more complicated than they should be trying. And it ended up being super frustrating for her, and I ended up having to fix it over and over and over again. So I think I ended up causing her to experience so much frustration that she may have been put off of doing this as a long-term kind of a hobby for her. So I didn't do her any favors by allowing her to do that, and I didn't do myself any favors by allowing her to do that. So it was a lose-lose situation. So I would recommend you give yourself some time to practice on beginner sort of things. Here's another example of an advanced piece that I might not suggest someone would do. Okay? Until you've got a few settings under your belt, something like this has numerous difficult things on it. It's got bezel settings for faceted stones. It's got a prong setting that's made from scratch for a faceted stone. It's got unusual shaped stones. It's got this, which was hand filed, and you might not be able to do that until you've practiced a little. And just assembling the whole thing without melting different components of it is going to be super challenging for a beginner. So again, something you can look forward to in the future, but maybe don't start with things like this. So some more appropriate sorts of things: simple rings that are mounted head on top of a band like this with some decorations and a simple bezel. Those are relatively basic and good practice projects for beginners. Earrings that are, again, simple bezels with some stuff attached to the sides, maybe. These are little kind of turtle earrings. So things like that are great ways to build your soldering skills, your metal shaping skills, all those important fundamental things you need to know before you really start to get into the more advanced stuff. So do yourself a favor, make lots of simple things at first, and you'll gradually start to pick up some of the tricks for avoiding having catastrophic consequences on your pieces. So a second mistake that I see a lot of people do is they get excited about the hobby, and so they read up on everything they can find out about it, and they go out and they buy just about all of the most expensive high-end tools that they can find, and all sorts of tools that they may or may not actually ever need. So for me, I don't have the pocketbook to do that kind of stuff. And so I suspect in the economy today, a lot of people are in that same boat. The good thing is you can get a good taste of what doing this is like without breaking the bank. A lot of those nice things to have, like a rolling mill, or let's see, like a bench shears, or those kind of things that are kind of expensive that you might want to save up for. You probably can hold off on those until you find out whether you really want to do this or not. Some people think, they're all excited about it, and then when they actually do it, they find out, oh, that's not really something that is, that suits my temperament or whatever. And some people really do, so you never know until you've tried it for a while. But I'd hate for you to invest thousands and thousands of dollars for something that you only do for 3 or 6 months and then give up. Now, as a person who sometimes buys people's tools who have gotten out of it, I encourage you to do that, because then I can buy your tools for really cheap and get some really nice tools. Just kidding, I don't really want to buy your tools at a loss for you. What I do want you to do is invest in some basic tools, and if you're interested, I have a video about basic tools there that'll talk about some of the fundamental things you ought to get and some of the things you probably don't need right off the bat, if ever. So check that out. That's a useful video. The third thing I would suggest is that a lot of people want to make really big items like cuff bracelets or belt buckles or big, I guess people still wear bolo ties. I don't wear a bolo tie, but some people apparently do. With really large, heavy pieces of silver, and they're trying to do it with a beginner torch or a torch that is really not designed for that kind of a size of a piece. These little torches, like this one here that I got from Pepe Tools, is a great little torch, but it's limited on the size of a piece that you can effectively do. You start to get an ounce of silver or more, and it starts to get really hard to get the entire piece up to the soldering temperature, which you need to do in order to solder silver effectively. So until you have a decent torch that puts out a little more heat, you're kind of limited to smaller pieces, and that's okay. What I would suggest is make a lot of smaller pieces, get your skills up, start producing some unique pieces that are nice, sell them, save up for a nice torch, and then once you get one of those, you'll be happy you did. So it opens up more possibilities for you. I don't know how many times people have said they were having problems with soldering and asked me what to do, and I ask them what kind of torch they have, and it's something very low temperature, and that's generally the problem at first when people can't get the solder to flow right. So one of the main things you want to do if you want to do big pieces is get a torch that produces more heat. So the fourth thing that I would suggest to people is that as soon as they start, because you're excited about learning how to do this new thing, as soon as you start telling your friends and family that you're doing this, you're going to find that everybody in your family has at least 5 or 6 broken pieces of silver jewelry, and all of your friends want you to fix their broken pieces of jewelry for free. And quite honestly, bench jewelers spend years getting really good at fixing things without ruining the piece itself or damaging it worse than it already was, and those are skills that you have to develop over a long period of time. Can I do a basic fix on things sometimes? Sure. Do I usually do that? Probably not, especially when I was a beginner, because the risk of accidentally ruining someone's family heirloom and being appalled by that and having them very upset by it is high until you've gotten quite a bit more experience. So I would recommend that you do not fix things for people unless you intend to become a bench jeweler. It's tempting because not very many people want to work on silver because there's not much money in it. Somebody buys a piece of silver jewelry for under $100 and they want it to be fixed after it's broken, and you tell them you're going to charge them $75 or $90 to do it. They may balk about that. They want you to do it for really cheap because they didn't pay that much for the piece of jewelry. So but you should be paid for your time and your experience and the risk that it takes in order to do stuff like that. So I would recommend you stay away from that unless you plan on getting into that in the future. And even then, wait until you've gotten quite a bit of experience under your belt. Case in point for me was somebody brought me a chain a silver chain that they bought down in Mexico somewhere. And the clasp had come off, and I agreed to solder it back on for them. And when I went to do that, I don't know how this was originally made, but the chain was silver, but the clasp itself appeared to be pewter. And as soon as I applied the amount of heat I needed to melt the solder I was using, the clasp itself turned into a big puddle of pewter. And then I had to refashion an entire clasp from scratch to fix that. And so you never know what you're going to run into when you're working on jewelry that's been made somewhere else by someone else. So there's a lot of different ways to do things, and it may present some problems that you aren't ready to deal with. So I would watch out for that kind of stuff. But your best bet, though, is just to avoid doing repairs until you've got some serious experience. And even then, the guy who taught me, he suggested this, and I didn't take his advice totally, but he always used to say, you know, if Grandma wants you to fix her bracelet, go ahead and agree to it, hold on to it for 3 years, and then at the end of the 3 years, melt it into a big ball of silver and give it back to her and tell her that that's the best that you could do. Sorry about that. And word will get around that you're not very good at doing repairs, and so nobody will keep asking you to do that. So I thought that was pretty funny, but don't really do that. I'm just kidding. But I thought it was a funny story. So. And finally, this one is after you've been doing it for a little while, but you're still kind of a beginner. Once you start making pieces that are of a quality that people want to buy and that are worth selling and are durable and well made, beginners have a tendency to underprice their pieces. So part of the problem is that there's a huge amount of cheap mass-produced jewelry that many people who aren't jewelry savvy can't tell the difference between those and something that someone has custom made and is a totally unique piece. And so if you're trying to compete against those imported cheaply made things, you're never going to be able to compete with those, because the amount of materials, the effort that you put into it, the time that you put into it, and the amount of time it took you to learn how to do it, you should be compensated for those things because you had to make those expenditures and use that time and those materials. So you shouldn't ask for less than you deserve. I'm not a big believer in artists starving. I think people who do good work should be paid good money for their work, and so you should do that. And I made the mistake when I first started out, just because of lack of confidence, of way underpricing my jewelry. And the really interesting thing is, one of the really interesting things I found when I was doing that was that I did not sell as much jewelry when I had it priced really low. And I think it comes down to the idea that people have that if something is cheap, there's something wrong with it. And so as soon as I raised my prices to a more reasonable price for something that's handmade and artistic, I started to sell more things. People didn't have that perceived cheapness kind of attitude about it. So even though it seems a little bit counterintuitive, making your prices a little bit higher than you're comfortable with, you may find that you sell more pieces that way. And you shouldn't be ashamed to do that. You know, how many hours did you take to learn how to do this? How many hours did it take to make that piece? You know, materials are kind of expensive right now, so don't short yourself on those things. That leads to frustration and low sales. So if selling your work is part of your deal, then make sure that you price things at a price that's where you're paid for your work. Those are the 5 things that I would recommend to beginners. Just to reiterate, 1, first, don't try to do a more advanced project than you're ready for. That's a good piece of advice to avoid frustration. Second, don't spend a huge budget on tools until you find out whether, well, number 1, whether you need those tools, and number 2, whether you're going to continue with this hobby, so you don't put out this huge expenditure and then end up having to sell those at a loss. So, third, until you have an adequate torch, don't try to do big projects, because that'll be frustrating and you'll struggle to get it hot enough to solder well. Fourth, when everybody starts showing up with all of their broken jewelry, avoid fixing it for them, because number 1, there's not much money in it. Number 2, you may ruin their piece. And number 3, it takes a lot of time and energy to do. So, and you probably want to be making creative stuff rather than fixing broken stuff, I would guess. So, finally, don't underprice your jewelry. You've worked hard to learn how to do this. You took the time to make it. You put in expensive materials, and you should be paid adequately for it. So, those 5 things I think are important to keep in mind, and I hope you found them useful. I'm going to give you a free 6th piece of advice. there's always something new to learn when you're doing this. I'm still learning after almost 30 years. In fact, I've learned more in the past couple of years with all the interactions I've had with various people through YouTube. Far more in the past couple of years than I learned over the course of the first 28 or 27 years. So always look for new things to learn. I think there's always a better way to do things. There's always a different way to do things. And there's always something new to learn. Okay, well that was the 5 things to avoid as a beginner. I hope you found that useful, especially if you're a beginner. And if you did, make sure to check out some of my other videos. I have 360 some now, or we might have even passed 370, I lost track. But there's a lot of content there for a lot of different levels, and I think you're almost certain to find something else you find interesting. So watch a few more videos, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment. So the other thing is, don't forget to check out the video description down below. There's some important links down there. There's a link to my ebook if you want a handy guide to 2023's video tutorials. That's available for purchase there. There's a link to my merch store if you want to get one of those design idea books that I find so useful. There's a link to my Patreon page if you want to find out more about that community. There's several other important links too, like my Pepe Tools affiliate link, and a link to safety as well. So check those out. Come back and visit again. Take care. Happy silversmithing.